Hey everybody, welcome to Purpose People. We got an amazing guest today. He's got a very interesting story, so we're going to explore all of that today. It's James from Mobiloo, so welcome on the sofa.
Thank you very much, Darrell. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so James, you've got a wide and varied career, and quite an interesting story. So I guess the question is, where do we start?
I was wondering about this, and I asked my wife actually last night.
Yeah.
And she said it's got to be about the motivation. It's got to be about the drive.
So what motivates you as a person? Because obviously, you know, there's some challenges you've had as well, and in terms of your disability and that, and we can talk about that. Mm-hmm. So let's go from there.
I'm really interested in this, and I've done some work on understanding my core values. And my view is, my belief is very firmly that that what matters motivates, right? So what matters to the individual is inextricably linked with one's core values.
Yeah.
So for me, I learned about 20 years ago. I learned a little bit about sort of how to understand what motivates, what values are, and where they've come from. I did some work on understanding what my own individual values are, because they are absolutely individual. They come from our own life experience. Yeah. And I think that was incredibly helpful for me to understand something which was previously a little bit of a mystery. So, you know, the values I think that really drive me are sort of integrity, authenticity, wanting to make a difference.
Yeah.
And I think I've discovered more recently that there's a big thing about social justice in there as well. And there are fun ones, including fun itself, and discovery and challenge. And, you know, when I look at I guess most of the stuff, or all of the stuff I've done throughout my life, I can link it into one or more of those values. And I think that's how I understand my motivation.
Yeah, so intrinsically with you as a person and you as a human, you have a set of values. And those values essentially become what I teach anyway, along the aspect of when you've got those values, they become your decision makers. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And so it's easy to have a set of values, but it's often harder to keep them. and there's pain with that, isn't it? That's why we're smiling, because we know some of the journey that you've been on.
Yeah.
But so when you first decided these are my values, did you ever think that it would take you to the places that they holding to those values would take you on?
Yes, I smiled, because actually, I totally agree with what you've said. About sometimes it being difficult to adhere to stick to, but for me it's harder not to. For me, to understand what it means to honour your values, and more importantly, what it means to dishonour them. And your values can be dishonoured by your own actions, thoughts, decisions, but also the actions and thoughts of others, and how they then impact on you. So when you hurt, it's quite often because you're either doing something which is trampling on your own core values, or somebody else is, you know, or both.
Yeah.
So when it comes to a choice of, do I honor my values or do I trample on them, the decision for me is easy, even though sometimes that takes me to some quite challenging places.
Yeah. So let's start with you, because you've got obviously a background in Paralympian and Paralympics and competing and stuff like that. So tell me that story, because obviously that's competitive sport at a certain level. How did those values open that up, and why sport? Why sport has been a good way of expressing those values?
I guess we're all a complex mix of all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I think I've discovered, I mean, okay, for me, sport has been a huge part of my life. So I did 35 years as a Paralympian. I've competed in 5 Paralympic Games across 3 sports, 18 World Championships across 7 sports. I started when I was 18,
Yeah.
sort of internationally, and finished my last competition was when I was 53. And yeah, looking to see what drove me to choose to take part in sport and to stick at it and to aspire to the highest standards. I mean, excellence is one of my values, right?
Yeah.
So I can see how that ties in. Winning isn't.
Competing is, though. you think?
Competing is, yeah, I think it's about competing with myself as much as everything else.
Yeah.
It's not about recognition either. It's about being the best I can be. But I also know, I had a lot of childhood trauma. I grew up in Belfast in the Troubles. I was shipped off to a boarding school at the age of 4, which was really traumatic. And being separated from my family, and that was because of my disability. And we would lie on our dorms at night and listen to the bombs and the shootings going off in Belfast, and that was really traumatic. And I wonder to what extent pain also drove me. So it's a complex cocktail of stuff that adds up to an individual and their life choices, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what sports, what actual sport were you doing?
Well, I discovered a love of running sort of in my mid-teens. Although I've always ridden a bike. I mean, although not competitively until much later on. I always had an interest in my sister's bike. She was a year older than me, but I learned to ride it before she could without stabilizers.
Yeah.
And that was sheer determination. So there's something innate as well. So in your life, not everything is nurture. I think some of it is nature, and I think I just had an innate ability in sport and an innate drive and a determination to succeed. So I learned to ride my sister's bike when I was 5, and my mum, my parents have been a huge part of my life because, to be the parent of a child who is born registered blind with 5% sight, and to not just allow but encourage him to ride a bike on the roads. I mean, that has been my independence through my life. And of course, the roads were quieter then. We were living in a little sleepy seaside village in Northern Ireland on the edge of Strangford Lough. And yeah, so to ride a bike independently from the age of 7, that did a lot for me.
Yeah, that's
incredible. And for my parents to facilitate and encourage it. I think there's a big, that's got to be a big part of the story, hasn't it? In terms of self-belief.
Yeah.
And slightly straying away from the sport, but it's still sort of in sort of, adrenaline bracket, if you like. I was really depressed at school. I was off sick a lot. And at the age of 9, we got a new GP in our little village. And in one of my bouts of illness, I was in bed at home, and he came to see me. And he talked to me for a while, and he went down to my mum afterwards. He said, "He's not really that sick, He's depressed. What does he love?" And Mum says he loves cars. So without saying anything else, the doctor picked up my mum's phone, and he dialed a friend of his who owned a local racetrack, motor racing circuit. And he said, "I've got a 9-year-old blind kid here. He's a bit depressed and run down. He needs something to get excited about.
Yeah.
So can he come and drive at your racetrack?" And the guy goes, "Yes, of course he can."
Wow.
That changed my life.
Yeah.
And that influenced a lot of work I've done really in throughout my life, because I've sought to create opportunities for other disabled people to have these kinds of experiences, sometimes life-changing experiences, through doing something that they and others didn't imagine to be possible.
So in that, would you say that gave you a sense of purpose as well, in terms of being able to be able to ride and whatever? But at what point did you make the transition from, I'm doing this for fun and enjoying it and it's given me a fresh lease of life, to actually decide to compete at like an Olympic level? Did you feel like that was as the process went on, it became obvious, or was it a kind of thing of you just set that as your target?
Yeah, there was nothing very deliberate or planned about it. I guess because I developed this love for physical activity through my mid-teens, I became very fit and strong and well developed as an athlete.
Yeah.
So it meant then when I was introduced to endurance sports, mostly sort of power endurance sports, I took to them quite well. I think I had a knack for learning technical sports. So, amongst the most technical things I've done internationally would be cross-country skiing and freestyle swimming. They're both highly technical activities. You're riding a bike and running, you could argue are technical, but my experience was that in terms of learning, cross-country skiing, swimming front crawl, that they're tricky. They're very nuanced. There's tiny little elements of improvement that you can always find to make a difference.
So the sport was what, triathlete?
Yeah, I've competed in triathlon. In fact, I do have some funny stories about competing in triathlon. Sorry, we're going to have to do a bit of an edit here because
That's fine.
I've missed out answering your original question. So
that's fine.
Can we rewind to that?
Yeah. Go for it.
So how did I get interested in competitive sport? Well, I mean, I discovered this love for physical activity. I discovered this love for running. I discovered this love for exercise and pushing myself and working in the gym. And so I was quite well physically developed. And then when the opportunities came along to compete in cross-country skiing, for example, or in track athletics, I was kind of ready. And so when, I went very quickly from my first experience of cross-country skiing was in Norway in 1981. And that was a sort of a consolation prize or a consolation at school for, those who wanted to go downhill skiing, who had a go at this previously. Oh no, if you've had a go before, you can't go again. But you can do this thing called cross-country skiing in Norway. So I thought, well, I might as well. And I was selected for the British team after a week on cross-country skis. I mean, I was fortunate. I had a very, very good coach and instructor for my very first week on skis. And I moved through very quickly, I suppose, from, participating to competing internationally. I moved on then from, cross-country skiing, track athletics. I also competed in triathlon, in swimming, and more recently in sort of tandem racing, tandem cycling. And like I say, I seemed to do best in the sports that were sort of that used the power endurance engine. I was pretty good over long distances, but I was much better at the sort of 1,500 meters on the track. It's a 4-minute event. 400 freestyle in the pool is a 4-meter event. 4 kilometer pursuit on the velodrome on a tandem. It's a 4-minute event. That's where I got most of my medals, in those sort of shortish but not sprint events. Yeah.
So it's interesting because you mentioned you do skiing and you mentioned you're doing cycling, and someone that's obviously not got the best sight, they seem to be quite dangerous as a as a choice of sport. Most people might go, well, maybe I'll do something where maybe running is a little bit, but the kind of sports like cycling and the skiing is probably the areas where you'll probably get hurt the most.
That's right. So we obviously don't take ridiculous risks like that, so you don't have blind people racing on solo bikes, although I have done that. And I have competed solo triathlon as well. But I take care, I operate within my limits. People see me as a risk taker, but I think I'm very, very aware of risk. I think I'm very aware of what my limits are. I do push them, but I'm always conscious, so on a bike, if I'm going down a hill on a bike, I'd be going down with my brakes on, and that happened a lot when I was competing in triathlon. Other sighted riders on a hilly course would come steaming past me on the descents, And often I would go steaming past them again on the climbs because I loved going up hills. But yeah, so going back to sort of, competing internationally in Paralympics and so on, yeah, if I'm on a bike, I'm on the back of a tandem. Because you're doing 50, 60, 70 miles an hour a lot of the time. Well, on a velodrome, you can do 50. Obviously, downhill in a road race, you can do 70, 80 even. It is high speed. Cross-country skiing is pretty fast and furious because obviously you're doing a lot of descending with tricky bends and stuff, so I obviously used a guide. So yeah, we adapt and we ensure that we're not taking ridiculous risks in what we do, but we're still getting to achieve our goals of taking part and succeeding.
Okay, so you obviously got this core value set. Part of what you have is a sense of risk taking. Then from the risk taking, obviously now you're doing competitive sports, and that becomes part of your life for a good 35 years, as you've touched on. But you're obviously in the middle of that, because that's quite an adventure, just that alone. In the middle of that, you made a decision to essentially start a company and become an entrepreneur. And, so it's like you've got all those things, your values and your ability to risk take, and then you apply those to entrepreneurship. So where is that something that you always planned to do, or was that like a load of circumstances that enabled you to go down that route? And then obviously entrepreneurship is known for its ups and downs and its risk taking and all that other stuff. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, I heard something in my teens. I think I must have been listening to Radio 4. It was some survey, I think, that came out, and it was asking older people what they most regretted in life. And invariably the responses from 80 and 90-year-olds who were towards the end of life and asked this question, the most common response they came back with was, I regret not taking more risks, especially with my career. I think that had a big impact on me. And I think I realized there and then that, well, why would I want to lead an easy life? Why would I not want to challenge myself to be the best I can be? So I think that's maybe where it all began. And there was no real plan to my life. It's just kind of happened. I've kind of drifted from one thing to the next. But when I think about it, and having an opportunity to speak to you, Darrell, on this podcast, it's made me really think: what are the underlying themes of the purpose, and where have my decisions, where have they tied in with what matters to me and my motivation and my values? And so, my first experience as an entrepreneur, I guess, was my brother and I in the 90s. We built a guest house in Northern Ireland on the shores of Strangford Lough. And I didn't want it just to be any guest house. I wanted it to be the most accessible for disabled people, the most accessible mainstream guest house in the UK. And it was. So that the proportion of rooms that we had that were wheelchair friendly, with nice wide doors, with grab rails, with level access showers, all the stuff you need, but not they looked really, really nice. Nobody could tell that these rooms, they weren't adapted. They didn't need to be adapted because they were built to be accessible, right? So for me, that was the driving force behind that work, was to create a space where other disabled individuals, where disability groups could come and hold conferences, could have weekends away, and enjoy good food, just like everybody else. So, when I look at that project, it's clear to me what my motivation was there. And then winding forward, I was working for local authority here in Gloucestershire back in the sort of 2008 to 2012 era. And I had the opportunity to get involved in a program called Aiming High for Disabled Children. So it was a government centrally funded 3-year program where a number of local authorities were given additional funding to try to improve the services that they were offering to disabled kids and their families. I was fortunate to get a job on the team, really great team, and I was able then to take the learning from my childhood, and particularly referring to the instance of the doctor and the owner of the motor racing circuit, and the words, "Of course he can." So we set up a program called Of Course We Can, and it's all about disabled kids having opportunities that then their parents wouldn't have thought possible.
Yeah.
So we've had kids with quite severe learning disabilities driving quad bikes on their own.
Oh wow.
We've had kids who require a lot of support at school, and support not just in sort of learning support, but actually support to keep them and others safe because of their behaviour. We've had kids who require 3-to-1 support at school, sleeping in the woods overnight on their own with knives and fire.
Oh my god.
Right?
Yeah.
And they are completely different people when you put them in that context.
Yeah.
We had one young girl who went on a cookery course with a Michelin star chef. She had a learning disability. She was very depressed, run down, stayed at home, stayed in her room, but somehow somebody managed to persuade her to go on this course. As she came home, her mum said, "Well, how did it go?" And she just grunted and went to her room. A couple of days later, mum hears daughter in the kitchen at 7 o'clock on the Saturday morning saying, "What's going on?" She's usually in bed until midday.
Wow.
She goes down to see her. What are you doing, love?" "Oh, I'm going out to get a job," was the answer.
Wow.
Right, so this girl had been on this course with a Michelin star chef. Her aspirations had totally changed. Her expectations of herself had changed. Her self-esteem had changed because she was given an opportunity, like I was, to drive a car. And she went and got a job at the local bakery.
Wow.
So that program is still running.
Oh wow. Cool.
I'd love to see it expand nationally because it's a superb program. So you can see the consistency there, in the career choices, although the jobs themselves have, there isn't much of a connection between building and running a guest house and then working for a local authority, being a teacher, and then starting the Mobiloo project. And the way that happened was that, we discovered that there were a group of kids who weren't able to take part in some of the activities we were organising simply because there weren't adequate toilet facilities. I couldn't believe this.
Wow.
Yeah. I traveled all over the world with athletes with other disabilities, so guys and women, wheelchair users, and I could see the challenges that were faced, but still, folks were able to travel, able to take part, able to function. But there were kids who wanted to join our Of Course We Can program who simply couldn't come to what we were doing because there was no toilet there for them when they got there. So the whole notion of what's called a changing places toilet, which is a big space with an adult-sized changing bed in it, a ceiling track hoist, an accessible toilet and wash basin with grab rails, shower facilities, a very high-spec bathroom. That sort of concept had been around for a while, but of course you can't lift a building and take it with you. No. So we thought, let's make a mobile version, right?
Yeah.
So we made the Mobiloo, which is a van, like a Luton van, with all of that kit inside and as much space as we can create in the context of a van that can pretty much go anywhere and create these opportunities.
And so the thing with that journey, because obviously I'm a bit aware of the journey, is that began to scale, didn't it? There was a bit more of a demand from various different people. I mean, how many vans you got currently doing that job?
Mobiloo's had a long story over the last 10 years. It's sort of grown quite a lot. Obviously, we've had other organisations see what we're doing and say, yeah, we'll do that too. Yeah. So there are a number of different providers offering similar services. But what we can say is pretty much every organisation that is running a service like Mobiloo started off either as part of Mobiloo or we built them their vehicles. And that includes the operation in Ireland. It includes the Mobiloos or their equivalent that are operating in the US. We built them here. We built one for the Qatar World Cup. Last year, and shipped it over. The fleet is growing, and like I say, there are now multiple providers of similar services, which is great because competition is healthy. But having said all of that, we're only scratching the surface in terms of the demand. if you look at a typical bank holiday weekend in the summer here in the UK, there will be several thousand outdoor events happening across the country. We should be at all of those. There's no reason that anybody should be excluded from an event simply because they have a particular requirement for a particular piece of equipment so that they can use the bathroom. That's not okay. And event organizers, venue owners around the country are waking up and realizing, well, not just that there's a business opportunity for them here, that they can attract more customers. There's also sort of moral imperative. Why would I? Well, now that I know, right? And maybe we'll come back to this question later on in the conversation. Yeah. What did you do when you knew? Right? We'll come back to that later. Okay. In the context of climate change, right?
Yeah.
What did you do when you knew that there were people who were unable to come to your event, which you're obviously really proud of?
Yeah.
What's your response? And obviously, the moral response is, well, I'm going to hire a Mobiloo. I'm going to make sure that I'm not excluding anybody. And then there's arguably a legal side to it as well. So one reason we've set Mobiloo up in the way we've done, we had a choice. We could have set it up as a profit-making organisation. We could have charged sort of commercial rates. But that, of course, then would have created a higher barrier to entry. So to set it up as a social enterprise where we could get subsidies, where we didn't have the pressure of, generating profits for shareholders, we were able then to keep the pricing as low as possible and therefore keep the barrier to entry as low as possible. And that then ties in with the Equalities Act, which places a requirement on providers of goods and services not to discriminate against disabled people and to make reasonable adjustments in order to accommodate the needs of those of us who have an impairment or a condition, which means that we're not like everybody else, right?
Yeah.
So there is that sort of legal element as well, and so we believe that Mobiloo counts as a reasonable adjustment, and so what this comes back to is the potential for Mobiloo in the UK and globally is absolutely massive, and we're only just scratching the surface. With about sort of, I think, 18 units operating in Britain and Ireland at the moment.
Wow.
We're just, it's the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, that's it.
There's so much more we could do.
And I think the key thing the theme that keeps coming out of this conversation is the ability to give people opportunity and remove the barriers to opportunity. So for me, it's like, if I ask what James's purpose is, I think personally, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that your purpose is helping remove the obstacles so people can take full opportunity.
That's really interesting that you put it that way, because, a lot of people say that in spite of the fact I have a sight impairment, that I have a fairly clear vision.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And that I can see my way. Well, there's two ways of looking at this. I can either see my way over or through or around these obstacles, or because I can't see them, I ignore them and crack on anyway. So you could spin that two ways, But yes, I think it's true. I relate to what you're saying there. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think that leads me on to the next part of your story. So you obviously got Mobiloo, you've got your foundation that's helping people and removing obstacles, but something that you're more recently known for, and there's been some publicity, and you've mentioned it as well, is your ability to be an activist and seeing that there are some causes maybe are not being taken seriously enough, and that sense of opportunity and looking after the next generation and beginning to help people or do whatever you need to do in order to help people has come at times at personal cost. So, do you want to just share us a little bit around your activism with climate change? Because there is a whole story there, and you obviously believe there are challenges with it, and you don't believe that people are taking it seriously enough. So, what's the journey that it's taking you on?
Well, first of all, I would challenge the notion that it's either something you believe or don't believe.
Okay.
I mean, 90% of the world's scientists are telling us this is fact. We can see it outside our windows. We can see the severe weather events increasing. in frequency and severity. Anybody who tries to question climate change, I would have to question their motives for questioning climate change.
Okay.
And very often you can see, that those who are most vocal, sort of against the climate change narrative, are those who stand to profit from business as usual. So those who are tied in with the fossil fuel industry, and yeah, I think most right-thinking people can see that climate change is a reality. It's not a belief, right?
Do you think, because obviously it's quite a contentious subject, do you think that with climate change, obviously the Earth is getting hotter, we know that, we can look at the thing, but do you think that we can, as humans, make enough impact to avert that situation?
Well, I don't know. Who does? But not knowing isn't a reason not to act, right? I would rather, so going back to this, what did you do when you knew thing, right?
Yeah.
I discovered, this. I discovered the climate crisis quite suddenly in 2018. I was vaguely aware, but my head was pointing in the opposite direction, right? I was doing my own thing, blissfully unaware really of the severity of the consequences and the rapidity with which it's coming over the hill at us. And my daughter sat me down one day and she told me stuff that I found absolutely terrifying. And I remember exactly when it was. And we met for coffee at Exeter Station. We were on our way to give a talk at the university. And she said, "Dad," I could tell everything wasn't all right. And she said, "Dad, I've just been reading stuff about the loss in ground-dwelling insects in I think it was Argentina, like 98% loss in ground-dwelling insects over the course of 30 years." Right? I'm not somebody who knows a lot about nature, but I am a mathematician, and I could tell that 98% loss was quite serious, right?
Yeah.
I started looking into, she started telling me more. That was kind of like the headline, the introduction. And she was devastated. And she was studying geography and environment at the time. And I thought, yeah, great, crack on, enjoy your course of study there. But suddenly in that instant, I turned on the dime and I thought, oh my God, this is something where I have to act. I have no choice here. I'm not going to leave you to do this on your own, I have a duty as a parent. Now that I know, what am I going to do? And I leapt into climate activism. There is no contentiousness about the climate crisis. The debate, I think, is what to do. And you've asked the question: can we head it off? Can we make change? And I don't need to know the answer to that, but I need to know that I can do everything I can, right? I could not live with myself if I didn't do absolutely everything within my power to make a difference. And the difference that we need to make is to put pressure on governments internationally to respond appropriately.
Yeah, because I think the argument is that the UK can do everything it possibly can, but there are other governments across the world that aren't doing anything they possibly can. And so therefore, it only takes a certain degree of behaviour and, extending that behaviour that negates everything that we're doing in the UK. So when you say campaigning governments, you got governments in mind, or is it just campaigning that the British government step in and do more?
Well, I mean, I'm a citizen of the UK.
Yeah.
I don't live. You get this. Oh, what about China? Go and protest in China thing all the time. The Chinese are actually moving much quicker than most in terms of moving towards renewable energy. Yes, they do have coal mines, and yes, they do have they are mining oil and so on, and burning oil and fossil fuels. But the speed at which they're transitioning is unbelievable. Now, Britain. There's a couple of things about Britain. I think I think it's a fab place to be. I think we're a really innovative group of people here in the UK.
Yeah.
I think history has shown that. But also, so that's the positive spin on it, the positive angle on it for me, which is we have the capacity to lead the world in this, in our response. And that's what we ought to be doing. There is the other thing about historic emissions. We started the industrial revolution, so therefore we have a duty. That's one part of the argument. I go with that. But more, I go with the let's this is something we have to tackle globally together, and let's be leaders. Why not? Because the cost of renewable energy is so low. We could set an example. We could make a very rapid transition. We've got the ability to do that in the UK, and we could really, really lead the way.
So I guess that's the challenging thing, and I think this is where people are, families in general are struggling with the government and things like that. Is the case of a push towards renewables. If it is cheaper, why is the cost not being passed on? Because you've got essentially fuel bills going up and up and up and up and up and up and up. And yet, if it's, as you just said, if the cost is cheaper to do, at what point is there like 10 years worth of investment? So everyone's got to pay more money for 10 years and eventually we all reap the benefits of it. What would you say to someone that's struggling financially and they got the crazy bills coming through the thing? And how would you counter that argument? Because these are arguments. I'm not saying...
Yeah, of course. No, I get them. I hear them all the time.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, it's not your responsibility as an individual. It's the nation's responsibility.
Yeah.
The government showed what it can do in response to a crisis, whether that was COVID or whether that was recovering from the Second World War. They didn't say to individuals, you go and sort this thing out yourself. Yeah. They took responsibility. They show they can do it, right? And all of this nonsense about blaming and shaming individuals who are struggling to pay for, a carbon-fueled heating and energy system.
Yeah,
that's not fair, and it's not right, and it's a diversionary tactic.
Yeah.
To take the responsibility away from those who should really be bearing that responsibility.
No, that's good, because I think that's obviously some pushback there. So in your eyes, because obviously I'm talking to an audience that is quite varied, in your eyes, what's causing the climate change, would you say? Is it more emissions? Is it burning of fossil fuels? Is it a combination of those? Because
there's the burning of fossil fuels that causes the emissions, so they're the same thing.
Okay. So we stop doing that, we think that we're going to avert the crisis. Is that what we're saying?
We have to drastically reduce our carbon emissions. That's step one. We've got the target of net zero for 2050. That target of net zero for 2050 has implied kind of stepping stones on the way. And one of those stepping stones is to reduce our emissions by 50% by 2030, which is why it's particularly galling to see the government roll back on, its targets.
Yeah, because if they push them back, or they just stave them off. I mean, just for the benefit of the people that aren't always in the loop, or stop watching the news, for example. So what have they done? Have they pushed it back by 10 years, or? Well,
they've pushed back the date at which diesel and petrol cars can be sold from 2030 to 2035. I mean, I don't want to get into that specific debate because it's really complex. There is an argument that says actually we ought to run our cars into the ground. It's the emissions. There are more. So with an electric vehicle, for example, more emissions are created in the production of that vehicle than in its lifetime.
That's the thing.
So if somebody was asking my advice, and I'm not, like I say, I'm not an expert, but from what I do understand, I would say to keep running an existing vehicle for as long as you possibly can, because but it's really tricky. The real answer is better public transport, right? The real answer is better public transport, better opportunities for active transport. And we are not very good at that here in the UK, and we have a kind of a car-based, a car-based existence. And when, for example, new housing estates are being built, there's very rarely a thought given towards the needs of those who would like to walk, and they're all based around the car.
Yeah, I mean that's obviously the thing when they're building infrastructure. It's the infrastructure is not built. They're almost built for houses to sell, but there's the amenities and things that are there. I came from a place called Yates, and Yates had the biggest suicide rate at the late 70s when it was built, because they built everything around a thing called the Radburn Plan, and Radburn Plan meant that the entrance to the house essentially by a car was the back of the house, but the front of the house was a network of paths. And in an ideal sense, it kind of made sense that people would go and visit each other and walk from place to place, and there was a network of paths and roads. But it was done so badly that garages had two doors on either side and no back doors. There was literally no amenities anywhere, so you needed a car to get to where you needed to get to. And then obviously it took years and years and years for them to start putting amenities in. And then they repeat the same mistakes that they did at Bradley Stoke, which is further down the road, and just built an even bigger estate, but not really learning. And then it's almost like the amenities came maybe 10, 15 years afterwards. By then you've almost got a generation of young children that are grown up without the ability to walk and do all this sort of stuff. So I guess where I'm at in terms of climate change, who would you recommend for someone to listen to on a podcast to get who would you say is worth listening to, that you say, what, they've sum it up brilliantly and answer a load of questions? What sort of person would you recommend?
I don't think I'm going to be able to answer that question.
No? It would be, because obviously you've done your research, so who would you recommend to research?
There's so much. I mean,
it's just
it depends. Okay, so it does depend who you are, how you think, what capacity you've got. I could say go and read the whole sort of however many 100 pages of the IPCC report. Not everybody has the capacity to do that, or the ability, or the interest. I listen to a wide variety of podcasts, but also follow the news. Look at the media. Actually, here's something that's just pretty interesting. So there was an article that went around in the right-wing media last week where there was a claim that said it's going to cost £6,000 per year per household to reach net zero. Now that article was absolutely and fundamentally flawed, and was shown to be a product based on a pamphlet from one of the Tufton Street think tanks, which are funded very opaquely, almost certainly by the fossil fuel industry. So the numbers of inaccuracies in that article are just outrageous, but still the right-wing media publishes it. So we do have a real battle on our hands here about, where do you get your news from? What's true, what's not? And of course, we're living in a so-called a sort of a post-truth world,
No, exactly. I mean, like for instance, I think the level of distrust in the media has come about from what went on with COVID, and and maybe certain things were said on one side and certain said on the other, and then what was actually happening, what was going on behind the scenes with the government and their behaviour. So I guess everyone's very sceptical of everything that's out there. And so for me, the reason why is like those people that really want to find out, they can go and find out, because we live in an age where the information is readily available. Yep. And that's why I'm saying to you, if somebody is sat on the fence going, well, I get that side of the argument and I get this side of the argument, is a case of, well, where do these people go to find more information that's reliable and credible, which is not framed with finance, if you like, where there's if you buy into this, really at the end of the day, the report is produced because somewhere down the line someone gets paid more. Is it that? I guess that's kind of where I'm coming from. So the generation of children coming through, and people like that can go to certain sources and go, well, read this because this is credible. Read that because it's credible. Read that because then we can start trusting some of the information that's out there again.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got sort of Navarro media, you've got Open Democracy, you've got The Guardian, you've got Channel 4 is pretty good mostly. I think
Channel 4, even them in the day, have produced documentaries contrary to the argument, even them themselves. So,
but they did produce and air the documentary with Chris Packham recently, where Chris is starting to ask himself, is it now time? Are things so bad, and is the government inaction so woefully inadequate that is it time to break the law?
And that's the thing with Chris Packham. He's obviously. He's being challenged. People are having a go at him. They know him from the Really Wild Show, which was a children's TV presenter, and now he's turned into this activist and whatever else. But I guess that comes back from wanting to do something that benefits future generations and willing to do what it takes. And I guess that's what happened to yourself, where you kind of made a decision. And when I say it then cost you, do you want to just share the decision that you made, the effect that you wanted, or the message that you wanted to convey, and what happened?
Yeah, I mean, I discovered the seriousness of the climate crisis fairly abruptly. I decided that I had to do whatever I could. And at the time, an organization called Extinction Rebellion was being launched. So this is the end of 2018. I had a look at the theory of change. It made sense to me. So, for example, the principles of Extinction Rebellion are based in historic precedent. So no significant change has ever happened in our society without people coming out on the streets and making a noise and saying, this isn't okay. So if you look at, votes for women, if you look at, for the suffrage movement, if you look at Black Lives Matter, civil rights, apartheid, every struggle in history where significant change has happened, even with disability rights. As a disabled person, I enjoy a degree of independence because people before me have fought for the rights of disabled people. So change does not happen by writing letters to your MP. It doesn't happen by an A to B march. It happens when people are prepared to get out in the streets, make some noise and say, this is not okay and we're not going to take it any longer. And that's sort of the principle, one of the principles behind Extinction Rebellion. And unfortunately, when you do stand up against the state, they will respond and they will attempt to silence you. And that's what's happening with the Public Order Bill and the Police Crime Sentencing, Prison Sentencing Bill. And because a minority of people in the UK are starting to make the noise, are starting to challenge the state, to challenge the government and hold them to account. What happens is then you generate this tension, which can ultimately lead to change. So we're seeing in Holland at the moment, we're seeing a scenario where Extinction Rebellion in Holland are blockading the A12 every day at noon. Now, what I understand is happening is that part of the theory of change is coming to pass, namely that the police who are ordered to arrest people for sitting in the road are starting to scratch their heads and go, hang on a second, these people have a point. And by the way, I didn't come into this job to arrest non-violent protesters who have a very valid point to make. So I'm going to not arrest that person, but instead I'm going to go and turn around and go to the government and say, deal with this. These guys have a point. negotiate. Now, it looks like that's starting to happen in Holland. It looks like it's possibly starting to happen in Germany. And so the sort of ripples of change are starting to sort of reverberate. There's also a couple of really interesting things which are happening on the legal front. So there are 6 Portuguese children who are taking 29 European governments, including the UK government, to court through the European Court of Human Rights on the basis that these governments are failing to protect them and protect their human rights, their right to life. There are a number of others. There's an initiative called Climate Genocide Act now. So it's another group of people who are saying, that governments who are knowingly taking decisions and implementing policies which harm future generations are criminally responsible, and that when we get to the point where those who are responsible for climate change, whether it's the oil industry or the governments that support them, when it gets to the point that those cases come to court and those organizations or individuals are held responsible, then I think some change will happen. Some big change. And it can happen very, very quickly.
So from your perspective, obviously you made a decision while you were in an airport. Do you want to just talk us through that?
Yeah, I was arrested a number of times. After my decision to join Extinction Rebellion, a few days later, I was walking arm in arm with my daughter onto Lambeth Bridge in London, in floods of tears. We don't want to do this stuff. I'd rather be riding my bike. I'd rather be doing something other than getting out on the streets and creating, I suppose, what ultimately ends a confrontation with the police. And we don't want that. But what we can see is throughout history, there's a precedent, and that is the only way that things will change. So, yeah, my first experience was joining Extinction Rebellion on their blockade of 5 bridges in December 2018. I obviously then joined the better publicised, the bigger rounds of protest in spring and autumn of 2019. The spring one was where 5 locations in London were occupied by very significant numbers, and the occupation went on for 10 days or so. The autumn 2019 event, if you like, involved a number of actions, including an occupation of the city airport in London.
Yeah,
I went along to participate in that. There were some of us who had purchased tickets to go through security in order to be able to make sure that the protest was seen and heard throughout the airport. And through an odd sequence of events, I ended up a bit stranded, a bit isolated from the rest of the group.
Right.
And in that moment, I thought, well, I'm here. I need to do what I can. I need to be the best I can be as an activist. And the idea of climbing on top of a plane came to my mind.
Wow.
Now, people will say that's mad. Yeah, it was. I actually watched my live stream for the first time the other day, and this is 4 years further on. And I thought, my God, you could have died, and I was.
Did someone see you on the top and then alerted, or because
Well,
technically,
I was taken out to the plane first, and I introduced myself to the head of the cabin crew, and she asked if she could take my bag and my coat and help me to my seat, and I said, yes, please, you can take these, thank you very much. I'm part of the Extinction Rebellion protest, and I need to climb on top of the plane. And she looked at me, and
wow.
She was silent for a moment, and I executed the climb fairly swiftly. So I was from the moment I was face to face with her until I was on the roof was really only a matter of a couple of seconds. And all the while I was making it very clear that this is a peaceful protest, and that I was part of the Extinction Rebellion action at the airport. I then took out my phone and I embarked on a live stream, again, which I hadn't ever done before. And we've mentioned my sight impairment previously, so I wasn't actually even able to see my screen and see that I was streaming, but I did it anyway. And it did go out, and it's had an awful lot of views. And in my live stream, I spoke about the reasons why I was doing what I was doing and what our demands were. And after an hour and a quarter, I was taken down and arrested, and taken to police custody. Ultimately, I was tried for the offence of causing a public nuisance, and I was given a year's jail sentence as a result of that.
And you didn't serve the full year, did you? You served 2.5 months on appeal. You managed to get back out?
Yeah, we went to the Court of Appeal, and I was released after 2.5 months. But that's not to dismiss the 2.5 months that I was there. That was
tough.
Prison is not. It's not a holiday camp. It's a tough place to be for anybody. For somebody who's registered blind, I guess it's tougher. It's got its own, that brings with it its own challenges. So
would you, given that, obviously, given everything that you've been through, would you do it again?
Not at the moment, because the consequences have been fairly significant.
Yeah.
So I lost my job as the CEO of a charity that I set up.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to rebuild the business, from that place.
Yeah.
I've had other sort of health related issues as a result of having been in prison. It's not the easy choice. But yeah, I would. I would do it again. I would do it again if I had the strength. If I was physically well, I would definitely do it again.
I guess where I'm coming from, it goes back to your intrinsic value of giving other people opportunity. I think if you look at that, as your purpose of giving other people opportunity, and obviously the understanding that you have with the climate, with life, with generations, obviously speaking to your daughter, I guess that seems to be the consistent motivator here, is that you always want to give people opportunity. And if people aren't taking the issues seriously enough, then it's diminishing people's opportunity to live a good life or a long life. And I think for me, that sort of like, as an observer looking in, you can see that someone that wants to give opportunity with someone who is registered disabled and has their own challenges is willing to do whatever it takes to give people opportunity. So it's, that in itself shows how committing to a value and playing it out to its full extent, you will get it challenged, but you can tell that's a value that you live, breathe, and are willing to, not die, but, as close to being locked up for. So what does the future hold then for James? Because obviously you've got the Mobiloo stuff that you're involved with. Obviously you've got the foundation stuff, you've got your story, you've got the climate. How do you see the next 5 years panning out for you, James? What's your focus?
It's really difficult. I think I'm in a period of reflection at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's only so much one person can do. I'm very aware that within the climate protest movement, not just in the UK, but internationally, I have been recognised as somebody who has made a significant difference,
mm-hmm.
as somebody who has inspired thousands or tens of thousands. When I was at Wandsworth Prison, a group of supporters were outside that prison every single night for 2.5 months, marching, playing music, engaging with members of the public, with prison staff, explaining what was going on. I received over 2,000 items of mail during the time I was there from all over the world, from NASA scientists, from Chris Packham, from Caroline Lucas, Jenny Jones, other politicians, other celebrities. I think there is an acceptance. There is an awareness that throughout history, activists who are prepared to give up their liberty, I don't know, have a place in history.
Yeah.
So it wasn't what I sought. What I sought to do was to raise awareness, to make some noise. And I guess I'm going through the process of digesting everything that's happened to me in recent years and looking to see what might happen next. And the answer, and I'm not clear on that just yet. But what I do know is that my purpose, my values, my motivation won't escape. It can't escape. It's part of me. And I think until the day I die, I will probably be, I don't know, somebody who maybe is recognized as having that degree of determination, that commitment, that somebody called it integrity recently. Walking the walk. I think that's what it's about. So inevitably, that's what my future will be. It'll be me trying to be as true to myself as I can be and trying to be the best I can be in the world and trying to continue to make a difference.
Well, James, thank you. I mean, if someone wants to reach out to you or whatever, what's the best place to reach out to you? Is it Instagram? Is it LinkedIn? Or is it dependent on what they want to talk to you about?
I mean, the best place to find me, my focus right in this moment, in terms of sort of my day-to-day, my focus is Mobiloo.
Yeah.
So mobiloo.org.uk, or actually look up Mobiloo on Facebook. My contact details are very readily available through both of those channels. I'm not very good at doing the whole LinkedIn and building an online personal profile. Maybe that's something I need some help with from somebody somewhere. Yeah, Darrell. So yeah, for the meantime, it's Mobiloo is where I hang my hat just at this moment in time, and that's how to contact me.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to grab the train, come and see us, and have a conversation. Thank you. We'll tell everybody to watch the thing and hear another side to the story and another side to the argument and just what it is about living your values. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Darrell. It's been great talking to you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Purpose People podcast. You can obviously see us on YouTube, where you can see our wonderful setting here that we film every time we do a podcast. But you can also listen to us just in your ears on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, and Google. Please like and subscribe to YouTube, and please leave a review on our podcast. It really helps us get the message out that can help people live a life on purpose, for purpose. We want to help you make purpose a priority.